Hi, man. I live in an apartment in the city. After graduating from college, I started working at a company and got married to a colleague there when I was 24 and gave birth to a son. However, the happy days were short-lived. During my pregnancy, my ex-husband became intimate with his junior female coworker. I found out that they were having an affair. Fed up with my irresponsible ex-husband's philandering ways, I decided to get divorced. I can't trust my dear son to such an irresponsible ex-husband. I made up my mind to raise my child on my own. However, the reality of being a single mother was much harsher than I had imagined, and an irreparable rift grew between my son and me. At the time, I worked part-time at a supermarket's cash register while sending my son to high school. But after entering high school, my son started hanging out with troublesome friends. He began staying out without permission, skipping classes, and eventually joined a notorious delinquent group, spending his days in fights. Richard, why? Why would you do something like this? Please stop hurting others and doing dangerous things. One day I received a call from my son's teacher that he had used violence towards his classmate. I was summoned to the high school, and in the presence of the teacher and the other students' parents, I apologized in the counseling room. Fortunately, the classmate only suffered minor injuries, but I had to cover the medical expenses. As I was driving home with Richard, a mix of anger, grief, and embarrassment overwhelmed me. Unable to control my emotions, I reproached my son with one-sided words. "Richard, you must never hurt or hit anyone, no matter what. I hope you won't cause any more trouble for people around you. What you're doing is a cowardly and despicable act of using force to dominate others." Up from the back seat, a sharp gaze and a piercing voice were thrown at my back. "Don't butt in, acting like you know anything. It's none of your damn business what I do and where I go. It has nothing to do with you. Don't talk like that to your parent. It does concern me. I'm your mother. Shut up. You're just blabbering arrogantly, giving me a long lecture. I've never thought of you as a mother. You're quick to spout pretty words, but exactly what do you understand about me when you lack everything?" Tears welled up, making it hard to see, and I desperately focused on driving without letting him notice. When did Richard and I start drifting so far apart? For 15 years since the divorce, I have been working tirelessly for my son's sake. Alone in this world, there's no one else who can protect this child who lost his father. While working day and night to support the family, I had done my best to be a good mother to Richard. And yet, before I knew it, my beloved son, whom I had wanted to protect even at the cost of my own self, was trying to fly away to a place beyond my reach. "Richard, dinner will be ready soon." "Huh? Where are you planning to go alone this late?" "Don't worry. I'm not coming back home anymore." "Wait a moment, Richard." After returning home, I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner when Richard emerged from his room with a travel bag, brushed past me, and disappeared into the night. Looking back, I regretted why I didn't go looking for Richard sooner, but it was already too late. I had hoped that he would come back home by morning, but that was overly optimistic thinking. In the end, since that night, Richard never returned to the apartment. I reported to the police, but with no substantial leads, I was at a loss. Losing my only reason to live, my son, I became a hollow shell of myself, filled with lethargy. Though I originally had a plump figure, since Richard ran away, I lost 20 kilograms and became emaciated, unrecognizable from before. On top of that, my physical and mental health deteriorated. After a prolonged period of treatment and recovery, I managed to return to work, but I had turned into a worn-out, unattractive, middle-aged woman beyond my own recognition. "Are you okay? Please don't push yourself. You don't seem fully recovered yet," said a colleague. "You look pale." "And about your child?" My colleagues at work began to sympathize, saying, "You poor thing." I couldn't bear the sympathy anymore and eventually resigned from my job. Where is that child? I remembered Richard and hoped that someday he would return to me. But my heart and body were already in tatters. Shortly after leaving the hospital, I received a call from my mother who lived in the city. She told me that my father's health had worsened, so I decided to move out of the apartment and return to my parents' home. Since marrying my ex-husband against my parents' wishes and becoming distant from them, returning home felt somewhat uncomfortable. But I genuinely worried about my father's health. I'm back. Oh, you've lost so much weight. What on earth happened to you? Well, you see, a lot has happened. While nursing my father at home, I started looking for a new job. After I returned home, I had an honest conversation with my mother about everything that had happened. So, that's what happened. It must have been tough. Why didn't you contact me? Even if you had said just a word, maybe I could have helped you. Sorry, Mom. I couldn't bring myself to tell you that I got divorced right after leaving home on my own because I was disowned when I got married. I didn't want to cause any more trouble for both of you. I'm sorry for hiding it. Don't apologize, please. After all, being disowned is just something. Dad said, in the heat of the moment, right? He would never truly disown his daughter. We're a close-knit family. Yeah, both my mother and father warmly accepted me as we sat around the dining table as a family of 3, engaged in casual conversations. My heart gradually settled and a sense of stability returned. By the time I had found a new job, my father's health had also improved significantly, and I let out a sigh of relief. You can stay here as long as you want, they said, but I knew that staying any longer would mean relying too much on their kindness. I had to start living on my own again, and I resolved to do so with just a few belongings. While sorting through my belongings in my room, I found a small charm bag and a worn envelope. Richard, brings back memories. Each item was a memento of my time with Richard. I couldn't bring myself to dispose of them before leaving the apartment, so I ended up bringing them back to my parents' house. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of stationery. It was a letter Richard had given me as a birthday present when he was in the 6th grade. The letter had a portrait of me drawn by Richard. To Mom, thank you for working so hard all the time. I'm really grateful for everything you do for me. I love you, Mom. I want to go play in the park with you again on your day off. Richard, 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 I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thinking about my son's heartfelt letter, filled with imperfect handwriting and effort, I couldn't hold back my tears. When Richard entered junior high school, he started becoming more reserved, and somehow we began to drift apart without me even realizing it. Caught up in the demands of work and household chores, I couldn't give him the attention he needed, and we grew distant. As I was overwhelmed by heavy regrets, my mother gently tapped my shoulder from behind. It's too early to give up. You're parent and child. You can definitely start over. But are you not going to believe in Richard? I heard your story, and since he's your son, he couldn't just openly express his feelings. He probably wished that you understood him deep down, Mom. My mother's words struck a chord in my heart. I was Richard's only mother. Even though I had thought I was doing everything for him, maybe I had been avoiding the most important things. Why did Richard end up going down the wrong path? If only I had taken the time to understand the reasons behind his actions and face them together, maybe things wouldn't have turned out like this. After leaving my parents' house, I started working part-time again and used my days off to search for Richard. I had no leads to go on. Despite being his mother, I knew almost nothing about his friends and acquaintances. The only source of information was Catherine, a neighbor from years ago who knew Richard since our children were in the same class. Although our sons used to be close, they drifted apart as they entered high school, and we lost touch. It had been over 5 years since we last communicated. When I explained the situation over the phone, Catherine was surprised and agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a cafe. Catherine was kind enough to invite me to her house, but her family was usually together on weekends, so I declined to avoid causing any inconvenience. "I'm sorry to bother you." No, don't worry about it. "I'm happy to see you again after so long." "Thank you." After exchanging greetings and gratitude, we engaged in some light conversation before getting to the main topic. Catherine listened attentively and offered kind words. Based on what my son told me, it seems Richard was targeted for teasing and exclusion by a specific group in his class. Back then, he was subjected to heartless treatment every day. They locked him in the restroom, hid his bag, defaced his belongings with graffiti, and verbally abused him. It's all horrifying stories, isn't it? Wait, Richard. At the time, even I didn't know about these facts. My son never mentioned anything. Only after you contacted me and I asked my son did he finally open up to me. I see. According to Catherine, her son had shared that Richard had been treated poorly by most of the class, becoming the target of cruel pranks and exclusion. Locked in the restroom, having his bag hidden, his belongings getting scribbled, and enduring verbal abuse, it was a series of terrible stories that make you want to cover your ears. What's worse, the reason why Richard became the target was partly because of me, his mother. He was being teased for our poverty due to the absence of his father, claiming we lived a poor life. Furthermore, he was mocked for me being divorced back then, saying that my husband had abandoned me. Though I'm not painfully thin due to exhaustion and stress, back then I was around 165 ulbs, and I can't confidently say I was taking great care of my appearance. That I was the reason he went through such a tough time. I wish I had noticed sooner. Richard, I'm sorry. And it's not your fault for the divorce, and Richard didn't do anything wrong. I think Richard couldn't bring himself to blame his mother, even if he was being spoken ill of because of you. Listening to the compassionate words of Miss Catherine, my eyes welled up with emotion. It's precisely because it's important that there are truths we can't express, she said. It reminded me of the same words my mother had spoken to me in the past. Frustration and a sense of inadequacy welled up within me, both from my own shortcomings and my struggles as a mother. I wanted to apologize to Richard for letting him suffer and carry his burdens alone. I allowed him to endure the hardships and malicious intentions from those around him, all while protecting me. And in the end, he chose to defend himself by lashing out at others. Even so, he never acted violently against me. I just wanted to meet him and apologize, even if it's just a few words. The intensity of that desire made my heart feel like it might burst. Since reuniting with Catherine, I've been tirelessly searching for Richard, sacrificing sleep whenever I could find the time. As my 49th birthday approached in the middle of July, I decided to use the summer vacation to visit the neighborhood around the apartment where Richard and I used to live. It was during this visit that I spotted a young father and his little daughter playing happily in a nearby park. The father appeared to be in his early 20s, and the daughter looked to be around 2 or 3 years old. This brings back memories, this small park with just swings and a slide. Richard used to play here a lot when he was in elementary school. Our financial situation was modest, so we often spent our weekends playing here together. Richard loved the swings, and I would push him higher and higher until he was completely lost in the joy of it. As I watched the father and daughter play, memories from the past intertwined with the present scene. Our gazes unexpectedly met, and in my haste to avoid eye contact, I quickly moved past the park. Yes. To my surprise, the man called out to me. "I have something I'd like to ask you. Would that be okay?" I wondered what this stranger could possibly want. Despite my initial suspicions, his behavior didn't raise any red flags. I cautiously approached the bench where the man and his daughter were sitting. Could it be? With each step, my heart raced faster, as if drawing closer to an answer. That peculiar sense of familiarity I had felt since hearing his first words was slowly solidifying. As I reached the bench, he gestured for me to sit down. Looking at his face again, I noticed a prominent mole under his left eye. I couldn't help but gasp. His sheepish mannerisms, the way he scratched his cheek, and even the position of that mole. Everything was identical to my son, Richard. Overwhelmed and struggling to find the right words, I took a seat beside him. He had his daughter on his lap, and in a soft voice he began to speak. The truth is, I've been searching for my mother who lived in this area 6 years ago. There was a leather bag in the corner of the bench with a faded red cloth charm tied to its handle. It was the same type of charm that now hung on my shoulder bag. It was a special charm bag that Richard and I had bought at a summer festival when he was in 3rd grade. My throat tightened and my heart constricted as I struggled to speak. That charm. This one, my mother bought it for me a long time ago. There's a summer festival every year at a nearby shrine, and she got it for me there. I'm not sure why I wanted this instead of a toy at the time, but now that I look at it, it's a charm for a harmonious family, I guess. Deep down, growing up in a single-parent household, I wished for a normal and happy family like that. And now? Do you still feel that way? Gathering my thoughts, I managed to ask the man beside me. He scratched his cheek bashfully and answered, "No, not at all." I can never thank my mother enough. Back then, I was timid and lacked courage. I couldn't bear the thought of my own actions causing people to speak ill of my mother. I was ashamed, frustrated, and angry at myself, but ultimately, I couldn't do anything. And I couldn't bring myself to be honest with my mother. I regret running away and hurting her selfishly. There was no hint of darkness in his profile as he watched over his young daughter. Leaving home and becoming a parent myself, I finally understood my mother's struggles. I had my supportive wife and her family, but my mother had no one. She raised me all on her own while working. I want to see my mother again and express my gratitude. During my days off, I've been asking around like this with my daughter. I named her Anna after my mother. Really? That's a lovely name. The fact that Richard, who remained as sincere and kind as before, and his beloved family were happy filled me with gratitude. Tears flowed naturally, soaking into the characters of the charm. You're my mother, right? Yes, Richard. I'm sorry. I reached out to Richard's trembling back, hugging him tightly as he had become a grown man. The moment I touched his back, I felt his grasp and realized the strength he had developed overcoming difficult days. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I won't go anywhere anymore. I've been waiting all this time. You have no idea how worried I've been. My voice trembled as I struggled to convey my emotions. And there, in a corner of the park, we embraced each other, making a silent vow to walk a new journey together from that point onward. Thanks for joining us. Like and share this video, and also subscribe my YouTube channel.